Support for The Common comes from the law firm of Davis Malm, representing HR personnel, businesses, executives, and individuals, gives Davis Malm's employment lawyers a 360-degree view of every workplace situation. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcast, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. Franz and Heroina Edouard and their family are among the hundreds of thousands of Haitians who left their home country for a better life in the U.S. It was a decades-long journey that took them from Haiti to South America to the U.S., and they shared their experience with WBUR reporter Simon Rios. Simon not only got to know the Edouards and their immigration story, but he got a close look at the state's emergency shelter system and what it took for this family to secure a home of their own right here in Massachusetts. Did I get all that right, Simon?
Hey, that was a pretty good summary right there, Daryl. Nice work.
Oh, yeah. See, I pay attention to these things. I study. I do the work.
Indeed.
So, Simone, this sounds like one of those stories that, us journalists dream of doing. You do the deep dive, you spend the time and embed yourself with some folks. So I would love to know, when did you first meet the Edouards? Tell us who they are and how you cultivated that relationship with them.
Yeah, so this actually goes back to our former colleague, Gabriela Emanuel, who was doing a stupendous job of covering the migrant shelter crisis as it unfolded over the last year and a half, couple years. She, of course, left the station, and she had gotten a grant. She
went big time on us.
She went to NPR, indeed. But she left after getting this grant from the Pulitzer Center. It's a $10,000 grant to help with translations as we found one of these shelters that we were hearing so much about. Identify a family that would open up their lives to us and go in and spend time and show what their life is like, why they came here, how they came here, and where they ended up. So I said, sure, I'll take the grant on, not knowing exactly what I was signing up for. It turned out I didn't need any translation help because the Edouards speak Spanish. They're of Haitian descent, but Franz was born in Haiti. Heroina, the mom, was born in the Dominican Republic. Her father is from Haiti. Then 2 of their 3 kids were born in the DR. 1 was born in Brazil. They speak all kinds of languages. Now they're here in the United States learning English. But we did our interviews in Spanish, and I found them reaching out to one of the providers. The Commonwealth Care Alliance is a nonprofit, a healthcare-oriented nonprofit that entered the shelter game actually during the pandemic when they were quarantining people with COVID and putting them up in these hotels. And then a couple of years later, this whole migrant crisis ensues, and the state starts basically renting hotels, dozens of them across the state. And these nonprofits, Commonwealth Care Alliance, administers the hotels. And so they were very helpful in connecting me with a family staying at a hotel in Stoughton, and it ended up being the Edouards, Heroina and Franz, and their 2 daughters.
How did they take to you initially?
I gotta say, it was quite a process, getting, first of all, to find the family that would be willing to even consider opening up their lives to us. As you can imagine, as we tell in their story, they went through so much to get here. Such trauma, such drama, such, suffering, and also the positive things. But if I were in their shoes, I don't know if the first thing I'd want to do would be to open up my story to the world, basically.
Yeah.
The attitude in the beginning was kind of like, what's in it for me? Which I suppose is understandable. I don't know if that meant they wanted money or if they thought it could help their immigration claims at some point. And, my answer to that was, it's in everybody's best interest to understand people like you and, what folks are experiencing. And, whether or not that convinced them, I think what was more convincing was just being in touch with them over time and sort of developing a rapport. And little by little, they kind of opened up. But it was never easy. It was always kind of reach out, see how they respond. Sometimes they would engage, sometimes less so. But ultimately they ended up telling us, really going back decades in their lives, to illustrate how they got to Massachusetts.
So, Simone, tell us about this decades-long story. Where does it begin?
Well, look, it begins in the 1990s. This is around the time Jean-Bertrand Aristide was removed from power. There were a few coups against Aristide.
Yeah.
And it was amid that political situation that violence was unfolding in Haiti. And Franz told us that his father was killed in the violence, as well as a brother-in-law. And he was a teenager at the time, and he saw no option but to leave Haiti, as so many hundreds of thousands, millions of Haitians have done, and to go right across the border on the same island to the Dominican Republic.
I had to run away from that country. We can't go back there if there's no government, if there's no security there.
He sort of settled in with Haitian community in the DR, and he met his future wife, Heroina. They ended up getting married and having kids. But for anybody who's somewhat familiar with the situation of Haitians in the Dominican Republic,
I was about to ask you, what was life like for them in the DR?
Yeah, I mean, it's very complicated. So, like, we're hearing stories like today about Dominican officials rounding up Haitians in the country, literally in cages, and like shipping them back across the border to Haiti, which is, right now experiencing unbelievable levels of violence and havoc. That's happening now, and this history goes back decades, if not more. So you have a Haitian man, Dominican woman, you get married, you think, from the U.S. perspective, that might get you on the path to citizenship or at least work papers, but neither were the case there. So they actually decided to leave the Dominican Republic and go to Brazil, right? Hundreds of thousands of Haitians have gone to Brazil in recent decades. Part of that was they had the Olympics in Brazil. They had, the World Cup, and there was work.
So that's jobs, right? Yeah.
Jobs. And apparently Brazil has historically been pretty welcoming to Haitians. But because of changing political situations, because of changing economic situations in South America, another wave started where these folks who had left Haiti or the Dominican Republic for Brazil and Chile, they all started coming in massive groups to the United States by land, through South America, up through Central America, the Darien Gap, which we talk about in the story. It didn't seem like there was a particular crisis happening with the family, but the sense is that, look, all we do is work, and we're not getting anywhere.
You work just to pay for housing and food, and we couldn't prepare a better future for our children. So I spoke to my wife. Let's hit the road like everyone else.
When they first had the conversation about leaving Brazil, this was during a very dangerous period in the Darien Gap. There were all kinds of stories of gangs in there, and extortion, and rape, and murder. And they were hearing these stories, and so Heroina said,
I told him, I'm not going to risk putting my children through that.
Why don't you go and, make it to the United States and then send for us, and we'll come when things calm down a little bit. And that's essentially what happened. It played out like they thought it would. He went by himself. He witnessed some unspeakable stuff. There was a tremendous amount of gang activity and kidnappings and worse. But that's what these folks, so many of these Haitians that we have now settling in Massachusetts had to go through. But he makes it to Mexico. The idea is to apply for asylum and get paroled into the United States pending your asylum proceeding, which can take years to play out.
I want to pause here just for the listener, because we hear the word asylum thrown around a lot when we're talking about immigration. Just remind us of what asylum is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a system that we have in the United States and many other countries for people fleeing situations of war and violence in different parts of the world. Essentially, the way it works from the perspective of Haitians who are trying to get into the United States, and of course other nationalities, after waiting for, it can be 5 or 6 months or longer to actually get an appointment. So you're in Mexico, you spend all that time waiting. You finally get an appointment. You say, I have an asylum claim. And if they sign off on it, what they call parole, the person into the United States pending their asylum hearing. Several months back, I talked to an immigration attorney, and he said that basically buys you 7 years in the country. That's how backed up the asylum system is to process these claims. Back to Franz. He gets in.
Yeah.
He has relatives in Indiana. So he goes to Indiana. He's in touch with Heroina. They talk every day. And finally, they start hearing that the Darien Gap was safer. And so, several months after he left, they decided that it would be safe to bring their kids through there. So we're talking about one of the daughters who was 17 at the time, and one who was right around kindergarten age. And as you can imagine, from Franz's perspective, I mean, your wife and your 2 daughters are about to go through this passage where you just witnessed this horrible reality. And that was a difficult time for him, just imagining what they were going through especially when they would lose contact.
Because I went to there first by myself. I saw the river sweeping people away with their children. Thieves killing people. These things get recorded in your mind.
How was it for them? How was the journey for them compared to Franz?
I think compared to what he saw, from what they told me, they didn't see that kind of thing. But what they did see was, going through the jungle, and the girls have health problems. They suffer from anemia. They didn't have food for parts of the journey. But hey, they made it through. And then it was, up through the Guatemala, Nicaragua, those countries in Central America, into Mexico. And they waited another 5 or 6 months in Mexico till they got that meeting with the U.S. officials to apply for asylum. And they ended up getting into the country the same way Franz had.
We made it into the country after so much waiting. But it was worth it. We are here. Thank God.
And they were all reunited in Indiana.
That's right. They were in Indiana, reunited, and I asked, what was it like? And Franz, he said a lot of the families that we hear about, when they split up to do a journey separately, there's no guarantee that they're going to end up back together. So when I asked about, how you felt upon seeing them, he more reflected on what could have been. And he looked at me and he said, "Brother, family is the most important thing,
Right.
And now the family was back together."
Right. All right, Simone, we are going to take a break right now. But when we get back, I want to know about how the Edouards made it up here to Massachusetts. And I also want to get into some of the larger questions around the Edouards story. So we'll be right back.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, host of On Point. At a time when the world is more complex than ever, On Point's daily deep dive conversation takes the time to make the world more intelligible. From the state of democracy to how artificial intelligence is transforming the way we live and work to the wonders of the natural world. One topic each day, one rich and nuanced exploration. That's On Point from WBUR. Be sure to follow us right here in your podcast feed.
And we're back with WBUR reporter Simon Rios.
Yes, sir.
So we're at the point now where they are reunited in Indiana. Everybody made it to the border. Everybody got in. Take us through the moment where they decided, let's go to Massachusetts.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because I always wonder that. And when I've been out in the shelters talking to folks, I always ask that question, why did you come to Massachusetts of all places? Typically, I think the answer to that question among immigrants generally is because they know somebody there. They have an opportunity there. In this case, right, the Edouards start their journey in the United States in Indiana, where Franz had a relative and he was working. But then when Heroina and their 2 daughters got there, they kind of hit a wall. There were a bunch of bureaucratic hurdles. She couldn't get work authorization. There was no help for them there. So because of that, they said, well, let's try our luck in Philadelphia. Now, she had family in Philly.
Good old Philly.
Yes, you have a Philly connection as well, Daryl.
Mm-hmm.
So Franz couldn't find work in Philly. He had his work papers, couldn't find work in Philly. And that's when they heard from a friend that Massachusetts was a place that's welcoming to migrants, that they could come here and they could get services here. And they felt like they didn't have any other options. And they got on a bus and headed to South Station. And that's where their journey in Boston began.
And now, after making it to Massachusetts, I guess that takes them into the state's emergency shelter system?
Right. From there, they were told by this friend to go to Boston Medical Center. They'll take care of you. You'll get plugged into the system of services. And they did. But from Boston Medical Center, they were transported to Logan Airport, which we've heard so much about over the course of this shelter crisis, that there was this area in the international terminal where, I think probably at the height of it, there were hundreds of families there in this little vestibule area, sleeping in mattresses on the floor.
It felt like there were 2,000 people there, families with children. The airport was full of people.
But they didn't stay at Logan for long. I think at like 3 a.m, these buses came by, organized by the state's Department of Transitional Assistance, and they were brought to one of the state's offices for processing. They were processed, and they were the first family to go to this hotel in Stoughton that was being slowly turned into to a shelter for migrants.
And so now they're in Stoughton, and this is where you meet them. Am I correct?
Fast forward about 6 or 7 months, let's say, after they first arrived, was when I came to the scene. Yeah.
What was it like for them to begin to get settled into Massachusetts? I'm thinking the search for work continues, but what are you doing to get the kids in school, for example? Like, how are they settling in now that they've found a place to stay in Massachusetts?
Look, I don't know if you've ever had to stay in a hotel for very long. This is a family of 4 in one hotel room and about 130 families in this hotel. So I think, there's a real sense of like not having privacy and a sense of crowding. But yeah, they had really what they needed most, which was shelter.
Yeah.
And by getting into the state's emergency assistance, family shelter system, that came with a whole host of services. So, first of all, they had a case manager who was basically able to hold their hand as they went through every imaginable bureaucratic process, how to enroll the kids in school, how to get, sign up for healthcare, how to sign up for EBT benefits. And so they had help with that. The shelters were offering English classes. Immigration lawyers would come in and help with immigration cases. And there was assistance with transportation and processing applications for work authorization. Anything you can imagine they had help with.
Did you talk to anybody who helped them navigate all of that?
Yeah, in fact, the third story that we did, we focused on this guy, Junior, a Venezuelan gentleman who was their caseworker. And I met him the first day I met the Edouards. He was in there, and this very vibrant guy. He speaks 4 languages, and he walks in. He's almost like a celebrity. Walks into the shelter, and the people just love him. Hey, Junior. Edouina, who's very religious, she said it was like having a guardian angel, especially when the time came that they had to find their own housing. Junior was this tireless searcher of housing. I mean, going through hundreds upon hundreds of listings and following up with landlords and real estate agents and doing everything he possibly could to help them find housing.
Mm-hmm. And throughout their story, the attitudes about immigration seem to shift in Massachusetts as more and more migrants were coming in, as it put more and more of a strain on the shelter system. So can you talk about that and explain to us how that affected the Edouards' experience here?
The right to shelter law has been around for 40 years. It wasn't intended to be a bottomless well of resources for whatever number of desperate migrants should come to the state. The use of hotels and the services being provided to migrants, that nearly tripled to over $1 billion a year. So there were, real financial concerns with the arrival of so many migrants to Massachusetts, for sure. That, that's from the perspective of elected officials and a lot of local townspeople in the communities that had these shelters. And in the case of Stoughton, where the Edouards were, Stoughton only has 2 hotels. And right now they're both being used as shelters. So some people in town say, hey, like, what if, what's the impact of that going to be? Yeah. There's an impact on tax revenue, conceivably an impact on things like business activity, maybe tourism, whatever it might be. So, and then additional strain on every municipal resource you can think of, the school system, police and fire, EMS. These are things that local elected officials were suddenly having to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Back to the Edouards, they're in Stoughton, they're in this hotel. What happens next? Because I also know that, as the state is dealing with this emergency shelter situation, Governor Maura Healey implements a 7,500 family cap, right, and also a 9-month stay limit. So, right. What's happening to the Edouards throughout all of this?
The Edouards are in the shelter for 8 months when that 9-month limit came down. Oh, boy. And it was retroactive, meaning if you've been in for 8 months and you have to leave after 9 months, you only have one month left. So there was this scramble to find housing. And they felt like if they weren't able to do it, they would not only have to leave Massachusetts, but even go back to the Dominican Republic, where they hadn't been for like over a decade at this point. Yeah. So the stakes were really high, but they had Junior, the case manager. He likened it to a game of Tetris.
We do help them navigate through life. It's like Tetris, really. Every family has their own Tetris game.
Which I was like, man, that is brilliant. And I start thinking about that Tetris as a metaphor, and how as the game progresses, it goes faster and faster and the music intensifies. And if you don't get that line, that solid line, game over. And so like to carry the metaphor over, that would have meant for them, for the Edouards, possibly having to leave the country. But Junior ended up finding a place for them in Fall River. And Edouina, another piece of good news for them is that her work papers came through. Nice. But she's looking for work. So it's, I realize talking to this family, getting to know them over time, that their life is just like an endless series of struggles. But they do seem to diminish over time. If you go back to the beginning when his father was killed in the violence in Haiti, and they had to leave the Dominican Republic because of discrimination they were facing there as Haitians. On and on and on, and finally getting to Massachusetts and getting shelter, but then having to leave shelter and not knowing if they'd be able to stay in the country, and then, finding the place in Fall River, but now I don't have a job, and getting my work papers. So, one by one, these folks, they ride out the storm.
Yeah, but they get a little further each time.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a big step back here, right? And I want to ask you about your experience coming into this story. Like, I wonder, how familiar were you with the situation in Haiti and immigration trends from that country?
I have to be honest, like my own family is from Uruguay, and I felt like I had an affinity with the Spanish-speaking countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I feel like because Haitians speak a different language, they're sort of cut off in a way from that larger sense of Latin American identity. So I didn't know a lot about Haiti. A lot of it was new. And I mean, going back to the days of French colonialism and having to pay reparations to the French for rebelling against their system of slavery and becoming the first Black republic. These are things that I learned as we went about reporting on this story and talking to Haitians who had been here in the Boston area for a lot longer, that despite the challenges that that Haiti has faced, the political difficulties, the poverty, and the natural disasters, Haiti has a tremendously proud history. And I think, from the more established folks who have been in the area for longer, they want to keep those things in focus and not just look at, the most destitute, desperate folks who are coming over now, but let's not forget where we're coming from and the history that we have to be proud of.
So now I want to ask, like, in this series, you introduced us to some music from Haiti, right?
So yeah, a friend of mine who's from Haiti, Daryl, I was talking to him about, wanting to use some music underneath our reporting. And he said, I have exactly the thing for you. This is an artist named Eddie Francois from Haiti, and a song called Edem Chanté. We can listen to a little bit of that. And my friend sent me a text message with the translation of the words here. And the singer is saying, "My friends, how are you doing? How are you underneath the heavy-heartedness, the headaches, the troubles? How are you under all this gut-wrenching? How are you doing here? How are you doing under all this misery and turmoil? How are you?" And we use some of this to come in and out of the pieces that we did along the way of telling the Edouards story.
Let's play it out right now. Simone, thank you so much for this series. Thank you for coming through and taking us through it. We really appreciate it. And yeah, as always, it's a pleasure.
All right, Daryl, thank you so much for having me on.
And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. The Common is produced by Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Emily Jankowski and Paul Vaitkes, and it's edited by Samatha Joshi and Ben Brock Johnson. And our theme music is Me, from Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Daryl C. Murphy. I'll talk to you next week.
Chanter ça.